The junior senator from Florida.
Madam President, as empty shelves grow more and more common, prices are surging higher and small businesses can't access the goods they need to serve their customers. Joe Biden's supply chain and inflation crisis are devastating for so many Americans. But it's our poorest families, those on low and fixed incomes, like mine growing up, that are hurt the most. Just last week, we saw the new CPI inflation data come out. Rates are the highest they've been in more than 30 years. Every month when I see Biden's new inflation numbers come out, and they're always worse than the month before, I think about my mom. Growing up, I watched my mom struggle every day just to put food on the table and make ends meet for her family. Now, countless families across America are dealing with that same struggle today, all because of Joe Biden's reckless socialist policies, like his unconstitutional vaccine mandates. These policies are fueling inflation and the current supply chain crisis, but Biden and his administration do absolutely nothing to fix it. Through my years in business and 8 years as governor of Florida, I learned that when you're trying to solve a problem, the best place to start is by bringing people together. When hurricanes devastated Florida, we had to deal with restoring power and communication services and getting resources where they were needed most. We brought people together and got to work to solve problems. But you don't see any of that with this administration. Just look at inflation. I've been talking about inflation nonstop all year, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Biden has totally ignored it. His administration attacked people like Larry Summers and me. Larry Summers is a Clinton Obama appointee who warned early on that reckless spending was going to fuel a massive inflation crisis. Now we're seeing the same thing with Biden's supply chain crisis. I've called on Commerce Secretary Raimondo and Transportation Secretary Buttigieg to come before the Commerce Committee and testify about what they're doing to resolve this problem. They haven't shown up. We haven't had a single hearing on this crisis in the Commerce Committee. I've seen them on TV dismissing the severity of the problem, and I was surprised to see Secretary Buttigieg had time to attend a bill signing, but still hasn't been to California to get working on the massive supply chain issues that are stranding dozens of ships off the California coast. Unlike the Biden administration, I'm not going to sit around and play TV commentator. Families in Florida expect and deserve more than that. That's why I was proud to partner with my friend and colleague, Congressman Carlos Jimenez, to introduce the Supply Chain Emergency Response Act to get products flowing to American families and businesses again. Our legislation is simple and common sense. Congress passed the CARES Act to help our economy survive the effects of COVID and the economic lockdowns. We know that much of that money remains unspent and could be used for far more important purposes. We also know that there are dozens of ships waiting to dock and be unloaded at California ports right now. So our bill would redirect $125 million of unspent, unobligated CARES Act funds to help pay for the cost of moving cargo ships waiting to dock on the West Coast through the Panama Canal so they can dock along the East Coast, including states like Florida. I want to be clear, this bill does nothing to mandate that ships are redirected to the East Coast. It simply provides an option and the funding to offset some of the cost. The bill would also allow governors to use their unspent and unobligated CARES Act funds to offset port fees and other related state-level expenses. It's a pretty simple idea, using the money meant to help with economic recovery to actually help with economic recovery. Just last week, I was at the Port of Palm Beach meeting with port and business leaders who are seeing the delays and effects firsthand. Their businesses are hurting. They're left waiting for weeks and months on resources they need to run their businesses and serve their customers. We need a solution, and Florida's ports are ready and able to help with this crisis. And with the holidays getting closer and closer, we can't waste any more time. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate 3224, which is at the desk. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion be considered made and laid upon the table.
Madam President, reserving the right to object.
The junior senator from Washington.
Madam President, I know my colleague, well, I can assume my colleague is sincere about his interest in doing something about our issues of port congestion and supply chain issues, but I disagree with his approach here today. I personally worked very hard on increasing the amount of investment in port infrastructure that was in the bill just signed by the President on Monday that helps increase port capacity around the United States. Why? because we've seen, even in a pandemic, an increase in trade and port activities. So, yes, we have to invest in our infrastructure. And I take disagreement to my colleagues' characterization that the president hasn't done anything, because the president has helped at LA Long Beach in reducing the congestion. He has put in place a better COVID response process, which my colleagues need to understand. Longshoremen died in the COVID pandemic delivering goods and products to us in the United States of America. They died. And so getting a better response and vaccination for people working on our docks is incredibly important. So the president has done something. He's got a better COVID response. He's basically helped at reducing congestion, and he's got a plan to invest in our ports all over the United States of America. So I know my colleague wishes that it would be so simple, but these shipping companies are reporting more than $200 billion in profit. $200 billion in profit, even during the pandemic. So they're not lacking for money, and if they wanted to go to those ports, they would go to those ports. So we heard from one of the big shipping associations that going anywhere, just to say that you want to go there, when there are logistical and cost reasons that don't likely bear out, eventually the customer really just wants to go where the customer wants to go. That is why it's so important to invest in our ports. That is why we led the charge for a $2.25 billion investment. Why? Because 95% of consumers live outside the United States, and if we want to be involved in the trade economy, we should invest in our infrastructure to get product to and from our citizens to other citizens of the world, the 95% that live outside the United States. So I don't think giving shippers who are having a record-breaking profit year more money is going to make them to go to other ports. So I do hope that we continue to look at ways to catch up from the fact that production in many areas of our economy were off. No more, big example, than the 8% reduction in oil from OPEC in 2020. Talk about something we need to address. My colleagues and I sent a letter to President Trump on high oil prices in 2018, and we recommended these various things that the president should do. Leverage your relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince to urge them to increase capacity in world oil supplies. Make sure the energy secretary is communicating that with Vienna and OPEC nations. Initiate world trade disputes regarding countries' anti-competitive practices. Work with our European allies in China that last year, and make sure that they are working on this issue. Direct the FTC, as we just had a hearing this morning, asking the FTC if they do see any kind of manipulation or moving of supply, please investigate it. And in this case, we said, abandon your administration, the Trump administration's rollback of fuel economy standards. Because guess what Americans want when there's high oil prices? They want more fuel-efficient cars. And that also is what we just legislated. And that is why we need to keep working on this issue. Because as long as we're in a world oil market, and as long as we're under these pressures of OPEC, we are never going to win the day. The best way to win the day is to get an economy that is less dependent on those prices being impacted by OPEC. Now, I may shock some people here this afternoon, but I am for getting rid of the Trump 301 tariffs. These have cost us enormous cost in the Pacific Northwest. Higher seafood cost, higher equipment cost, higher cost on agricultural products, higher cost on aerospace. So we've had the two dilemmas of a COVID pandemic taking a workforce out of production, Literally. I don't know if my colleagues supported the aid to the airline industry or not, but when we basically hit COVID, it ended up costing over 15,000 jobs in the aerospace sector in my state. Gone. 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 So, not here today. So, if you imagine if that happened with airline production, why? Because what airline was going to buy a new plane? It wasn't going to happen. People are saying now they don't think it's going to happen until 23 or 24, even though there are some announcements happening now. In general, people don't think that this airline sector is going to cover to where it was before for several years. So just imagine every other sector that did the same thing, that reduced their workforce in response to COVID. And now we're seeing the impacts of that. So what do? Let's be smart about each of these cost areas and figure out what we can do to reduce those costs. So giving $125 million to basically the shipping companies of the world who basically have made record profits. One company said that was the biggest profit last year that they've made in 117 years. Okay, so they don't need more money to just go from LA Long Beach to Miami. But since I want the senator of Florida to know, I actually believe in his port economy. I don't know what's going to happen to the port economies of the world. I don't know if we're going to switch dynamics. We've supported freight investment because freight can't wait. If you don't have good freight movement, you're going to lose to some other country. So we supported that. In fact, I see my colleague from Maryland here, the director of the Port of Baltimore came and became the director of the Port of Seattle. And I said, do you think if we invest in freight and moving freight, somehow we might lose on the West Coast to other places? And he said, the pie is just going to continue to grow. And everybody will lose if we don't increase more efficiencies. That is the objective, increase more efficiencies at every port. I know the presiding officer from the Great Lakes wants to do the same thing. Increase the capacity and efficiency of the Great Lakes. Let's get an icebreaker. Let's invest in port infrastructure. Led the charge. Why? Because I know that the president presiding today knows that the competitiveness of your state in Wisconsin depends on manufacturers getting those products made and outside your state and on to a world market. That is what is going to help us with our economy and reducing price, is to get production up and to get product moving efficiently. So if my colleague, and I sincerely offer this, wants to help me, because I guarantee you not everybody on my side is going to call for this, but I'm definitely for calling for a repeal of the 301 Trump tariffs. I didn't approve them when he did it the first time, because these kind of punitive tariffs just basically exacerbated the problem with retaliatory tariffs. And those retaliatory tariffs are costing us right now. So I know that Secretary Yellen is looking at this. I know USTR is looking at this, and I would just encourage the president to look at this. And I would encourage the president to do everything he can to work with our nation countries to put pressure on OPEC, just as we did before, to try to address this issue on price. But let's work not on reducing the cost to shipping companies that don't need anything because they see record profits, and let us instead invest in our ports and our ports economy. So, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
The junior senator from Florida.
Madam President, I appreciate my colleague, and I'm proud to serve on the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation with her. Let's remember what we're talking about here is a supply chain problem, and let's not ignore a very important fact. That committee has not held a single hearing on this crisis. I've been calling for Secretary Buttigieg and Secretary Mondo to testify in Commerce Committee on Biden's supply chain crisis for weeks, and haven't seen one bit of action taken to make that happen. I don't think we can wait any longer. American families can't wait any longer. Biden's supply chain crisis is hurting American families everywhere right now. The president's failed policies and unconstitutional vaccine mandates are stifling business growth, crippling our supply chain, and fueling his inflation crisis. Restoring our supply chains is critical to getting the American economy rolling again, and something President Biden doesn't seem to understand, but we need solutions. I actually feel sorry that my Democrat colleagues have to cover for the president's failures instead of actually helping the American people. Passing this bill today would have given us the opportunity to provide some needed relief in the supply chain and help lower costs for American families who are worried about whether they will be able to afford Thanksgiving dinner and Hanukkah gifts and holiday gifts. We need solutions now, and today's inaction is a perfect example why the American people don't trust Washington to get anything done. I yield the floor.